Welcome back, everybody, to Disc Media, a startup story, the podcast where we take you behind the scenes of starting a business from the ground up. And today we're going to get into a topic that I love talking about. I love it for a lot of reasons. And I like it because of the different angles and perspectives that people have on it, the things that people bring to it. And we're going to be getting into a lot of conversation today around leadership. One of the things I like to do when I teach a class, often because I teach business, have young budding business folks in my courses. And one of the things I like to do is I say, how many of you think you're a good manager? Right? And I get a couple hands that kind of slowly go up, not a whole lot. But then when I say, how many of you do you feel are good leaders? And then boy, the hands just shoot up, right? Now here's what's interesting about that. Management is very quantifiable because management is about kind of oversight of task. It's very task oriented, right? So there's going to be some evidence as to whether or not you're a good manager because we can look at the numbers. When it comes to leadership, it's a little bit more subjective at times. And even though it is not necessarily subjective discipline, it's one of those things that I think people tend to feel like, well, I can kind of work my way into being a good leader. But here's the thing. You don't get to decide whether you're a good leader. It's the people who follow you who decide whether or not you're a good leader. And so this is one of the reasons why I love getting into this topic, because it's got so many different angles to it. And today we have somebody who is an expert in this space, somebody who has worked with a lot of small business leaders and has developed a course called Growing Your Own Leadership Course. He focuses on helping companies develop managers from within, turning strong individual contributors into confident, accountable leaders. And that, my friends, is a big trick. Welcome to the program today, Mr. Rich Ashton. Rich, how are you?
Fantastic, Ben. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And like I said, this is one of those topics that I just love getting into because there's a lot to it. There's a lot of self-proclaimed leaders, and then there are a lot of good leaders who just never really talk about themselves as a leader. But before we get into that, I always like to dig into the background of the folks who we have with us, and I would love to hear a little bit about your journey that kind of brought you to the work that you're doing today.
Sure. Happy to talk about it. I was really lucky that my first job, once I got out of the Navy, was with a company called Trammell Crow, based in Dallas, a large real estate developer. But despite its large size, it was a very entrepreneurial company. And I was a guy I had cut my college short after 2 years. And so I didn't have a college degree. And I was working around people who not only had degrees, but they had advanced degrees, largely from Ivy League schools. So I got an introduction to business with a company that was extremely ethical and had a great culture, but was filled with driven people and who had a lot of leadership experience. But it gave me the grounding for everything that I have done since. I ultimately became a partner at Trammell Crow. I served as a partner for 5 years and then sold my interest back to my partners. And just simply because I'd always seen myself as a small business guy, I wasn't sure that I was successful because of me. I was a little concerned that I had been plugged into a great company and a great system, and that my success, which I was having a lot of success, but I just decided that I had to prove to myself, and I wanted to be outside the real estate business. I liked the real estate business, made some money there, but it was not my passion. And I knew that small business was closer to my passion. Customer service was certainly in my wheelhouse, and so I began looking for companies or a company to buy and operate. I did that for several years, and in 1988. I purchased a broken down, nearly bankrupt HVAC company. I still own the company today, but we did a turnaround on that, and it has been a wonderful journey. I've owned some other companies along the way, but that's been my primary focus for the last 40 years.
So, it's I love that story because one of the things I often talk about, as a matter of fact, I just spoke with just had an interview yesterday, which as of the airing of this, that one will have probably aired already. But Um, we were talking about, how I kind of came up in this generation where there was this prescribed path to success, and that included going to college and getting a job with a good company, and at least from my parents and their perspective, it was all about working for a big company as long as you could get the gold watch and retiring. And of course, that is a story that is certainly not for everyone. And even more so these days, I think younger people are realizing that that whole idea of you have to have a college degree, you have to, have some higher education to be successful is really kind of gone out the window. There are so many examples these days of people who have really built themselves into a success who didn't go that kind of traditional educational path. And I love the fact that even your own story, no, you might not have finished, but it didn't hold you back from doing some really good stuff and accomplishing some really good wins.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, I wish that I had been mature enough to finish my college education, and that it would have made life a little simpler along the way. So I don't advocate it, but I think, like you said, you can overcome that, and I'm an example of that.
It's interesting because here here I'm a college professor. Kind of one of the things I do, and I have a PhD. And I'm also saying you don't have to. So it is a little bit of a mixed message, but I guess what I'm saying is that there are certainly folks who figure it out, like just have good mentors, have good teachers, are able to learn, have grit and stick to itiveness, and are able to persevere through that stuff despite it. And it kind of leans a little bit into this conversation around leadership because the interesting thing about leadership is you need, I think, a good coach. You need good mentors. You need people who invest in your development because not everyone is kind of a natural born leader. Leadership is a skill that has to, I think, be developed. Not to say that there aren't natural born leaders. I think certainly there are, but for a lot of us, it's something that we have to study. It's something we have to practice. It's something that we have to get feedback on and get mentored on. Thinking about that, how did you shape your own kind of leadership study, your own leadership style, and then leverage that into helping others?
It's a great question, and I have two answers to it because I was raised by a very smart, hardworking, ethical father, but his leadership style, which I copied as most boys do, his leadership style was very authoritarian,
Mm,
and it worked for me for a while. But around the age of 40, I began running into some roadblocks with my style, and people who my career got off to a pretty fast start. But as I looked around, I saw that some of my friends in small companies were passing me by, and I decided that I needed to make a change. I began looking for things that they were doing, ways they were handling situations, and comparing them to mine, finding that they were having success in those situations, and I began to change my leadership style to become much more relational. Fortunately, I am married to a relationship superstar, and she has no interest in business. But as I look back now, I realize how much I learned from my wife about the treatment of people and getting the most out of people. So she was one of my great mentors without ever intending to be a mentor. I just copied a lot of what she did. And then I was around a number of successful people. And so I was able to pick something here and pick something there. And my relationship strengths began to really pay some dividends. And so I'm a very different leader today than I was at 35.
I can certainly appreciate that. I would say that I think I share a little bit of that myself. When I was younger, I was much less forgiving, very hard on myself. I'm always hard on myself, but I carried that into, I think, how I measured other people as well.
Sounds
And
very, sounds very familiar.
yeah, it's kind of like if I'm getting through it and persevering through it, one of the one of the terrible not that I lived by this mantra or anything, but it's certainly something that resonates in my head as a feeling that I had many years back, which is, I have sympathy and not empathy. I understand it's hard. I just don't care.
Yeah.
And not a great leadership approach.
No, that one won't get you far.
It certainly doesn't. And I mean, for your own internal motivation, like, I'll be honest with you, internally for me, that is the approach that I still take about things, in that I focus on the objective. I'm not one who's going to voice my opinion about how difficult something is. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to, kind of dig in. And that's my drive and my push. But I think something I've learned along the way is that's what works for me. That's not what works for everyone. And, one of the things I love about reading about your background is that you've really kind of looked at how servant leadership really helps to promote better leadership qualities than having that kind of authoritarian approach. Um, and it's funny, my dad actually is from Texas as well, and he would have a authoritarian approach too. I think it's just of that generation. People kind of dug in, if you will.
Oh, I think that's very true. I began, as I changed my style, I began to appreciate that not everything that works for me works for other people. And while I was a sponge and an observer, as I began to train people, I realized that not everybody absorbs information. Not everybody seeks information, or as I like to say, pursues intellectual curiosity. And so, as I was training, particularly blue collar people to become leaders, I realized that I was going to have to be very deliberate in teaching them, very strategic in teaching them the concepts that I wanted. Some of them had worked for me for quite a while and had not begun to model my leadership style. Not because they didn't like it, because they did like it, but they just didn't take it as their own. They didn't see a need because, frankly, a lot of them never saw themselves as leaders. So I had to be very strategic and not wait for people to learn from me. I had to teach them. And so once I learned that, and once I got people to understand that there were roadblocks to them becoming leaders, self-imposed ceilings. Because they had never seen themselves as a leader, they hadn't absorbed leadership information. Because life had taught them that they can't do things, they had stopped trying to become more than they were. They could be a great technician and they would learn about technical things, but they would never broaden their intellectual pursuits to include leadership or management or psychology or any of the things that you have to study if you're going to be an effective leader. So the modeling of behavior had worked for me, but it did not work as I was trying to transmit that information to other people.
As you say that, I'm reminded of something I often talk about, which is, management is very tactical, in that, often management and supervision is about looking at the numbers for the day, the week, the month, the quarter, or even the year. Management is all about making sure that the everyday tasks are getting done. And while you're kind of getting fed the longer term strategy from upper management, your job oftentimes is to make sure that the dailies are kind of getting executed. Um, you talk about moving people into a leadership mindset, a strategic mindset, and you even mentioned it, and you had to develop a strategy around it. And strategy is very much part of kind of leadership thinking, because you've got to look ahead down the field and try and predict where we're going. and that is all about strategy. So how do you move people who are used to being a little bit more tactical into something that's a little bit more strategic?
I found that I had to teach them to think about themselves differently and to explain in very simple terms that strategy was part of the deal and part of the expectation, and that you could not be a leader, an effective leader, if you weren't thinking 2 and 3 steps down the road. One of the differences between small businesses, which I have always been in for the last 40 years, and big businesses is that you can be a manager without being a leader in a big company. It's really hard to be a leader. I mean, to be a manager and not be a leader. We do so many different things in a day. You're not going to be good at all of them. But even when you're in or you're outside your wheelhouse, you're doing tasks that you're not particularly good at. A good leader can get through that and continue to have people follow them. A weak leader cannot. And once they get out of their specific wheelhouse, they become very, very ineffective. So we teach people to lead while they're doing a number of tasks, some of which they're very good at, some of which they're learning as they go. And as I began to teach leadership to these non-leaders, there was a little magic missing in the course, and so I don't know exactly why I decided to do it, but I began writing a blog every 2 weeks to the leadership team, and the blogs were in no particular order. I wrote about things that were germane to what we were going through at the time. And I used lots of personal examples, lots of anecdotes, so that I was illustrating simple concepts in a way that could be understood by a non-leader. It didn't work at first, but the general manager said, if we will get them to talk about the blogs in the management meetings, he said, I think we're going to bridge that gap. And we did. So they are not natural pursuers of new, leadership knowledge. But once they were in a group setting and they talked about the blogs and they talked about how they impacted the things that they were doing on a daily basis, it really made a difference. They began accumulating the blogs and using them as a desktop reference. They also began holding each other accountable for the principles contained in the blogs. And it was very, very interesting to watch how it took off from that point. And there is a book called Extreme Ownership. I'm sure that you've read it. Most people have. One of the reasons that book is so successful is that they take a leadership principle, they illustrate it with a combat experience, and then they illustrate it with a real world leadership business experience. And it's very effective because people learn the principle 3 times. I tried to copy that somewhat in my blogs so that every principle was illustrated by something that they could identify with and understand. And it wound up being a great way to teach people who had not had a lot of leadership experience or had not acquired a lot of leadership information.
That's a really effective way of getting people to kind of start focusing on that stuff. A question that I have as I think about that is kind of how long were they? And 2, how did you get people to read them?
Well, we made them read them. They were required
Well,
to.
that's one way to do it.
That was part of the learning experience. Actually, they would always read them because they were written. They were easy to read and they were kind of fun to read.
Yeah.
And they liked reading them. They just didn't take it any further until the general manager said, no, we're going to talk about this for 20 minutes in a management meeting. And he was very intentional about having them read it. And then, they would have been embarrassed.
Read it. You were noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. And then as they held each other accountable, if someone hadn't applied the principle, they were called out pretty quickly, and they were being called out by peers, not by superiors. And so it was kind of accidental for me because it wasn't my idea to make them read them in a management setting, but it was really effective, and that's what really unlocked the buy-in to this leadership growth.
Yeah, I think it's as somebody who writes, I like to write. As listeners know, I just put out a book myself not too long ago. And I will say one of the things I've been criticized about, not just it would be one thing if it was one manager who gave me this feedback, but I've heard it from multiple people at multiple companies I've worked with. It's like, Ben, your emails are too long.
You asked how long they were. They are what became the book, and in the book they are 2.5 pages each, and
Okay.
so the chapters are very short, very understandable, and that was part of the success. Had I written them a 5 page essay, they wouldn't have read that, and it ties into the fact that um, traditional leadership books are written for big companies, and they're very well researched, and they have great theories and great practices and lots of stories, but I would never be able to get my people to digest that much information and apply it to their own situations. It had to be done in short bursts, and I'm glad that I lucked into that formula of writing blogs because it definitely worked.
I've been working on Dist Media now for a little over 3 years, and trying to find that approach that hits people. My desire is to put business information and content out there for people to help them, as our mantra says, get better at what you do. And one of the things, the initial approach was we'll put a lot of written content out there. And it got some traction. The website got some traffic, but not nearly the amount that we needed to really sustain. The minute I started doing more podcasting, putting more videos out, doing short form clips, things like that, now all of a sudden, we're starting to see momentum and growth. And I love the fact that you knew your audience well enough to know what was going to reach them and what was going to work and resonate with them, and you met them where they were, and help to kind of raise the bar. That's really really good. But thinking about that, so when you're something you mentioned too, I just got to throw this in here, is you talked about small business, that kind of comparison between small business and large business, and you are so spot on with that. In small business, you wear a lot of hats. Like, you might get hired to do one thing, but you're going to do about five other things on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. At least five.
At least five that that you're going to have to do, because otherwise, there's no one else to do that stuff. Whereas in big business, you can kind of stay safely in your lane for a while. And if things get too complicated, you can always reach into some other department or some other level of expertise and kind of bring them along. In small business, you don't really have that as an option. Um, as you work to groom people and really help scale businesses, I know one of the things you've done is a lot of small business, kind of consulting and coaching. What are some of the things that you see in your experience where there is opportunity for improvement? Do you see any like repeated patterns of things that people continually kind of need to focus on?
Well, the classic dilemma that I faced and every small business person faces is when your business has had some success and it's time to grow. You have a choice between hiring a leader from outside the company, usually trained at a larger organization, or you can promote somebody from within your company, but then you realize that I don't have anybody ready to lead, and you haven't had time to train them. So if you bring in somebody from outside, not only do your existing employees who have worked their tails off helping you build the business, do they resent that move, but they probably are not going to respond to that person who comes from a very different background, doesn't respect the uniqueness of your small business culture, and certainly doesn't appreciate being told to do 8 different things in a day. That's not their comfort zone. So I realized that I was going to have to take people who were steeped in our culture. I would have a much better chance of building them into leaders than I would by bringing people in from outside and grooming them. I had a little bit of success with bringing in outside leaders, but not enough to want to repeat it. And I also had some failures promoting people before they were ready. So I realized, just as other business leaders do, I realized that there has to be a process for getting people in your culture, in your organization, ready to lead when you need them to lead. And that was the reason that we developed the leadership program that we have around the book. because it's it's not easy for a small businessman to make leadership training a priority. You just don't have time. You're trying to survive and grow and do all these other things. Leadership training just falls by the wayside. So the course in a short form and the book that goes along with it are a way to bridge that gap for a small business person. I really think if you go to 100 small businesses, you'll find that dilemma in every single one. Again, there just isn't time to make leadership training a priority.
Yeah, 100%. You know, I don't often talk about my primary work that I do, my 9 to 5, if you will. Um, and the reason I kind of bring it up in this instance is because my 9 to 5 for many years was big business, big consumer product goods company. Worked for Coca-Cola for 20 years, right? So that it's about as big a company as you can get, right? Um, and you make time for training, right? You sign up for it, you let your manager know, they give you the time, the business kind of manages while you're away, everything's great. Then you come back and we talk about it, and you work on incorporating it into your routines, and becomes kind of a bit of a focus. In small business, because having left big company and for the past 10 years working for smaller companies, there one of the things that I see repeatedly is, we kind of talked about it before, the work needs to get done. Like, first and foremost, that needs to get done. And so the time to like, one of the things that you all did, which I love, is you had meetings and you spoke about it and you held people accountable to it. And how do you get small businesses to think about that routine and that development of having regular meetings, holding people accountable? Because oftentimes I think what can happen is you have a meeting, the leadership talks about the business, and then a brief moment of time for, like, hey, anybody got any questions? Okay, break, let's get back to it, right? So how do you get people to get into the discussion about holding people accountable to thoughts and ideas and how we move forward, um, without it just kind of being a check-in on the business, and then you break and get back to it?
I think we've been very good and very intentional about our meetings. I kind of learned meetings at an early age, and so it's been fairly easy for me. But our meetings are all, somewhat scripted. They have an agenda in advance. We talk about things for a certain length of time. We keep on moving on. We have expectations that at the next meeting, there will be a follow-up to what we talked about today. It just becomes a routine. You have to teach that. It's probably not a natural behavior. And I agree with you that a lot of companies don't do that. But that's really the only way to be very effective. Otherwise, meetings just become another pain in the butt, and nobody wants to go to them because they don't ever accomplish anything. But if there's an agenda that's circulated in advance, so people know what's going to be talked about, and then the expectation is that when you come back next week for the follow-up meeting, you'd better have done what you said you were going to do, and you better have attacked the problem. And so once you create the expectation that things are going to be followed up on, I think meetings can be made to be very, very effective.
So one other thing that you mentioned, was, as you worked with individuals, expose them to new information, introduce to them this idea of asking questions, and kind of developing themselves within their role. At some point, we've got to promote as growth happens. You got to move people into different positions. You got to raise their level of authority and accountability. How do you identify a good leader as you're growing your organization?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I like to use athletics as a good laboratory for this. If you go in the locker room of any team at any level, there are stars, and everybody knows who they are, but they're not necessarily the leaders of the team. The leaders of the team are the untitled unrecognized people who everyone go to for information, for advice, and to solve problems. Every organization has them. So if in my company, if you hold a service meeting, there's the service manager may be the leader, but the real important person in the room is the one who all the technicians are going to go to afterwards and say, what was he talking about? I don't necessarily agree with this. I didn't want to raise it in the meeting, but what do you think about this? And well, those are the people who are the natural leaders, and those are the people who can be developed the fastest. They often don't even think of themselves as leaders, but if you look who people gather around, those are the natural leaders. So I always am on the lookout for that. And in a small company, you know who they are. And if you're smart, you use them. If you have a new idea that before you roll it out to the whole company, you go to the informal leaders and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? What does this sound like to you?" Well, they love being included in the process. They may give you fantastic feedback. And when you do roll the idea out, they're your greatest advocates because they were part of setting the program up. And so I'm a big believer in looking for those informal leaders.
So, on that point, because I agree, it is amazing when you have that person who everybody goes to, they gather around because they're looking for their insight. And that person, by the way, is also bought in on the mission, right? But what about when you got that person that everybody goes to because they are the skeptic of the mission? And, one of the reasons everybody goes to them is because they want to do the gut check on, what do you think about this? So we know how to properly complain about it.
Yeah, that's a fundamental question in business. I believe in rooting those people out, and if you cannot make them your ally, they don't need to be in your company. And they hurt you whether it's a big company or a small company. They can do so much damage. Being a
Yeah.
skeptic is fine. I'm very comfortable that my ideas will stand up to scrutiny from any skeptic. And I love to talk about the ideas and love to have a constructive debate. But if the only thing is your management and we're in the field and we're not buying what you're selling, if I can't solve that problem, then they need to be in somebody else's organization. And we're very proactive about that. As I said, I'm very understanding of skepticism. I'm a skeptic myself. I like to have those conversations, but I want them to be productive. I don't want it to be something we're going to go back to every single time. And why is it you're not on board with this program? And what's today's problem? Those people will kill you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad to hear you say that. That is overwhelmingly the kind of feedback that I have heard written in books, managers all the way, people like Jack Welch, used to talk about things like that. But even, people that we've interviewed previously on this podcast have spoken about that, about how, the detractors really got to move quickly on that, because at the end of the day, you need people who are moving in the same direction, and you're trying to build something. That is something a small business entrepreneurs, really any business, is trying to do, is you're trying to build something up. And if you have someone in there who's constantly trying to, tear everything down to build themselves up, that's not a good recipe for success. So as you're prospecting out there for good leaders, people who can be developed and kind of move forward and take the reins, what are some of the things that you try to instill in leadership, people who you're developing in a leadership direction?
Pick four or five things. And I think leadership starts with communication. If you're not a good communicator, you're not going to be able to influence people. And so we work at first on the art of communicating. And I'm just a believer that most communication stops too soon. People tell other people what to do, but if they don't make sure that the person understands what's being asked of them, if they don't set a timetable for a task to be completed, if they don't check in along the way, then ultimately that conversation is going to be unsuccessful. And your only answer is, well, I told them what to do. But if you didn't get them to understand it and you weren't on the same page, you're not much of a communicator. So we work a lot on communication. We work on accountability. I mentioned extreme ownership earlier. I think that when you understand the military's version of accountability, in that if you screw up at your job, somebody may lose their life. That's a lot different than managing profit and losses. And if you take the accountability that everything that happens on my watch is up to me, and I'm willing to put my job on the line. Now, in our case, if a service technician performs poorly on a service call, I'm not the one who made the mistake, but I'm the one who owns the company. I'm the one who either equipped them or didn't equip them. I hired their manager. I set up training programs. If we don't perform at any level, I have to take accountability for that and make sure that that problem never happens again. Now, I'm not naive enough to think that we can solve all problems in advance, but with that attitude and that level of accountability, we can solve a lot of them before they ever become a problem. I'm very big on being proactive rather than reactive as a manager. Proactive managers make things happen. Reactive managers let things happen and then wonder, why it always happens to them. And then I mentioned real early in here the pursuit of knowledge. The longer I have gone, the more I appreciate how important it is to acquire knowledge if you're going to be an influencer at any level. It's great to understand business, but if you don't understand people, you're not going to be able to lead people. And so I encourage people to read and listen to podcasts and listen to audiobooks every single day. I got that recommendation when I was 24 years old. It made all the difference in the world for me. And I read on a variety of subjects. I do it about an hour and a half every day, listen to podcasts, listen to audiobooks. And the breadth of knowledge that you acquire over time is so valuable to you as a leader. I don't know how you can be an effective leader without having a breadth of knowledge.
Yeah, information acquisition, it's got to be I think a part of your daily routine. It's funny. I teach a lot of MBA students, and they're the ones I really, kind of I start to put a lot of pressure on them in this regard. I say, you guys got to think about it this way. You're going for a master's in business. A master. It means that when you graduate, you will have mastered this subject. And the reason I start talking about this is because oftentimes I'll bring up recent things that have happened in the news, that have happened in business. And it's not like small stories. I'm talking about like major, major events. And I'm like, hey, did you guys hear about, this? And crickets. And I'm like, come on, like you can't be a master in this subject if you are not going to every day expose yourself to some information about this discipline that you're studying. Like you have to, raise your level of knowledge and information. And it doesn't mean that you have to be an expert. It doesn't mean that you have to have all the answers, but you should at least have some awareness of these things that are going on.
I think awareness is a great word. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, because Lord knows there are so many complicated issues in business, and so many things that are really take some study to figure out and study to solve. It's impossible to be, an expert at all of these things, but you should at least have, again, the awareness and have some, some opinion about it, like some thought about it. I think that's one of the things about leadership. One of the things that graduates you. I mean, everybody is always a manager, but leadership is one of these things that is kind of a little bit of a step ahead of that. And what leaders tend to do is think about the long-term implications of information that you have to manage, or situations that you have to manage. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, because you've written this book, and at some point you said, I've got enough of these experiences. I've got enough anecdotal information here, and a lot of wisdom and a lot of experience to put into this book. What was that point where you finally said, I want to bring all of this knowledge into one place that I can use as a platform to share with others?
Well, it's a little embarrassing to say this, but after 2 years, I had written 52 blogs, and I frankly was about out of ammunition. I could see that I was beginning to repeat myself, and I thought it was probably time to shut it down. But fortunately, they had made great strides, and it was a good time for me to step back and let them, even though I was still in the building, let them take the reins of management. And so our team, which began at 8 people, was 6 people by that point. 2 people just didn't get it, and so I turned the company over to those 6 people, led by the general manager, who is now the president of both companies. And I read through the blogs one weekend when it was raining and I was stuck at home. And so I read through all 52 blogs and I said, I'm proud of this information. If for no other reason than just a legacy project when I retire, I'm going to put this in book form. And so I consolidated the 52 chapters into 35. I reorganized them in a more logical manner than I had written them, and went ahead and published the book. And then my entrepreneurial nature took over, and I said, well, maybe I should make a retirement business out of this. And so now I'm having fun promoting the book and the course that go along with it. But because when I started writing or started the leadership training, I went to the internet and I went to my bookcase and looked at all the management information, leadership information that was available. And there is so little information out there that applies to small businesses or that is aimed and written for them, that I have learned through this journey now that just how necessary this information is, and how many companies are in need, companies and would-be leaders are in need of this information. So it's become more of a mission than it started out, and I'm thoroughly enjoying getting this information in the hands of people who need it.
Rich, I got to ask this, and I feel bad because I didn't research this, and maybe I even missed it. But out of curiosity, do you podcast? Because you said that you listen to a lot of them. Do you do any of that on your own?
No, I've done all guesting, and I'm not sure that I want to tackle being a podcast host. I have really enjoyed being a guest on so many different shows, and I love the conversational format like you have. The ones who are just scripted and ask a bunch of questions, they're not terribly interesting. But I like having these kinds of conversations because obviously I'm passionate about the subject. So I don't see myself as a podcaster, but I have been asked to become an occasional co-host with people, and that kind of appeals to me. So that may be part of the future direction.
Yeah, it's interesting because given you have a really great kind of natural approach to delivering information, and probably honed from your many years as being in leadership in business. But I say that because even if you took your phone and you started making TikTok videos or short YouTube vlogs, just kind of 2 minutes of your own opinion and posting it out there, I think you could do really well with that. I think there's a lot of really good, keen insight that you can bring. And part of the reason I also throw that out there is because you mentioned that you felt like you were running out of steam. I guarantee you, when you start putting more stuff out there and talking about it, you'll get more ideas. You just will. And then the transcripts, by the way, of all that stuff can go into book number two.
Okay, well, I have noticed that the last couple of weeks I've been coming up with new blog ideas. So maybe I'm on that path. I don't know. We got to
You,
make
you,
this book a success before I worry about number two.
well, one of the things I wanted to ask about, because you do some consulting, you do some work with other people. Tell me a little bit about that, and how you're working with others beyond what you've done with your own business.
Well, I developed a short version of the training course in which I go to businesses and present the information over a couple of days. We start with a meet and greet so I can understand what the leadership ceilings are on each of the participants. And then I do 3 2-hour sessions over 2 days with small groups. I like to do 10 or less. And I've had some success doing that. I enjoy doing it. Um, I don't know if I will ever do that remotely. Right now, I just enjoy being there so much and interacting with people directly that that's just an in-person deal. I do a fair amount of public speaking. Probably a great setting for me is to be at a breakout session in a trade conference, for instance, with a bunch of HVAC people or plumbers. And I talk to them about this dilemma in all of these small businesses where we don't have leaders ready to take over when we need to delegate leadership responsibility to them. And that's a subject that, you see a lot of people go, yeah, a lot of heads nodding in the audience. So that's what I'm doing. I try to stay away from individual consulting. That doesn't really appeal to me. I like the bigger groups, and I stay only I stay with small businesses all along because I think that's where my message resonates. So that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to be retired at the same time. So I don't want to overload things. I do a fair amount of just complimentary mentoring. I really enjoy that. I did one 2 days ago with some people who they're just a small business and nobody has ever really sat down and meshed that entrepreneurial vision, which is very strong in their case, but with the business practicality, which they don't quite understand, and they're getting themselves in some problems. So I do that for the fun of it, and I really
That is
enjoy it.
awesome. I love that. It's as somebody who's put a lot of time, energy, and effort into this media company, and I do it more out of love than profit. There is none. but but really, I do it because it really just is a lot of fun. I get to meet wonderful folks like yourself in the process of doing this, and for me it's very much my creative outlet for stuff. But to me it's always fun to give back. Part of the reason I teach as well. Rich, let me ask you this, because when you think back on your experiences, the people you've worked with, the people that you've developed, is there anyone that you kind of think back on as a proud moment in this journey that you've been on?
Lots of them. I have often told the story about an employee who came to us 19 years ago and was intent on working for 6 months to earn enough money to go back to Mexico. And he, 19 years later, is a significant part of our leadership team. Never saw himself as a leader. Not only has he developed as a good leader in our company, but he's Hispanic, and Hispanics generally have large extended families, and there's somebody that kind of runs the show. Despite the fact that he's in his 40s, he's the de facto patriarch of his family because he gets this leadership stuff. He's become a better parent, a better father, better husband, and certainly a better leader within his family. And he's an important part of what makes our company successful. So that's one of my favorite stories. There are others, but if you get to know people and you give them an opportunity to take the lid off on their potential, you get to share in lots of successes along the way. And I'm fortunate to have gotten to share in a lot of successes.
That's awesome. I love that story. Thank you for sharing that. Man, Rich, it's been such a pleasure talking with you and get to know you and learning more about the work that you do. I want to make sure that people know where to find you. So, how do people get in touch? Where do we get more of what you have to share?
The website is growingyourown.net, not .com, but .net. I love hearing from people directly, and I'm happy to start up an email conversation that will develop into a phone conversation. My email address is rich, RICH, at growingyourown.net. I do. I'm not a big social media guy. At my age, that's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. But I am on LinkedIn on a regular basis, and I do what you were talking about. I do post some short videos occasionally on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with people there.
Awesome. Well, that is great, and I'm gonna throw this out there. Rich, soon to be on TikTok and YouTube as well. I'm gonna have to, reach out to some people and get you on those platforms, because I think you have a really great message. I think that there's some bigger audiences that you can influence by reaching out to some of those other folks. And this, I think what you have to share is something that is really beneficial for a lot of people, especially a lot of younger people. And you got to reach them where they're at, and that's where they're at. So you can get on, those two. Throw Instagram in there too, and before you know it, you're gonna be an influencer yourself.
Well, that's a long reach from where I am right now, but I'm learning new skills every day, and you may be right. That may be the track I need to go on.
Well, thank you so much. And for everybody checking out Disc Media, a startup story, thank you guys for popping in once again. We do this, as I mentioned, it's a labor of love. And one of the reasons I do it is because I get to share really cool information and talk to some really neat people along the way while we do it. Want to encourage everybody to please like, share, subscribe. I know that sounds so cliche. You guys hear it all the time, but that's what the algorithm gods like. And as you all know, we are on a mission this year to hit 100,000 subs on YouTube by the end of 2026. And it's growing. So I appreciate those who are out there sharing it and liking it and commenting. It is wonderful to hear from y'all. Everybody else. By the way, also, shameless plug for my book. If you guys want to pick up 10 topics to help managers, leaders, and entrepreneurs get better at what you do, please do. Available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble. And you know what? While you're there, pick up Rich's book as well, Growing Your Own, right?
Correct.
Make sure that you check that out. Pick them up as a pair. And you know what? And buy a couple more for your friends and family. Boy, man, that would just be amazing. Anyways, thanks, folks, for checking this episode out. We will be back next time. So talk to you later. Have a good one. Thanks for listening to Disc Media, a startup story. This podcast was produced and edited by Ben Olmos and is a production of Disc Media Corporation. If you're interested in learning more about anything you heard on this episode, please reach out to us at podcast@discmedia.com. You can also get more information about this and other episodes or information about our guests by checking out dailypitch.news, our business and insights publication focused on helping managers, leaders, and entrepreneurs get better at what they do.